The rain had just begun to fall when she slipped into the passenger seat of my car, her perfume faint but impossible to ignore in the small space. Streetlights blurred against the wet windshield, painting streaks of gold across her face, and for the first time I realized how tired she looked beneath the immaculate armor she always wore at the office. My CEO, the woman who never let anyone see her falter. She sat in silence, her hands folded tightly on her lap, as though even resting them on the leather might betray some weakness. I told myself to just drive, to keep my eyes on the road, to pretend that this was nothing more than a favor at the end of a long day. But when we passed her building, she leaned closer, her voice breaking the silence like a secret slipping free. "Don't stop here," she whispered, her words low and fragile. "Take me all the way to your place." In that moment, the world outside faded, the rain, the city, the rules I had been living by. What remained was the sound of her breath, and the undeniable truth that nothing would ever be the same again. Until that night, my life had been simple in its routines and heavy in its silences. I was a single father, a man who worked hard to keep the pieces of a fractured world together. Every morning started before dawn, packing a small lunchbox, ironing a shirt that had lost its crispness years ago, and making sure my daughter's hair was tied neatly before school. She was the anchor that kept me steady, the only reason I managed to get through days that often felt endless. Yet behind my smiles, there was always the quiet weight of exhaustion, of knowing that there was no one waiting for me at night, except her soft breathing in the next room. Work was never a dream, it was survival. I wasn't in a corner office or making big decisions. I was the one who drove others where they needed to go, kept schedules on time, and made sure those above me never had to think twice about the details. That's how I came to work for her, the CEO who seemed untouchable. To everyone else, she was power-dressed in elegance, her heels clicking against marble floors, her voice measured and calm even when entire rooms of executives bent beneath her words. To me, she was distance, a life I could never imagine crossing into. Still, I watched. Not in a way I'd ever admit, but in the quiet moments, the way her eyes darkened when she thought no one was looking, the way her hand sometimes hovered over her phone as though she was waiting for a call that never came. It was loneliness wrapped in diamond bracelets, a silence that matched my own, though from opposite worlds. At home, after long hours, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at bills that never seemed to end. I kept telling myself that stability mattered more than anything, that I couldn't afford mistakes, especially when every choice I made shaped the life of a little girl who trusted me completely. Yet the nights were long, and when I lay awake, I sometimes wondered what it would feel like to have someone ask me how my day was, or to simply share the burden of silence with another adult. She, on the other hand, was always surrounded by people, but untouched by them. Her calendar was full, her meetings endless, but the car rides back to her apartment were often quiet. I thought she chose silence because she didn't want to be bothered. It wasn't until much later I realized silence was her way of not breaking apart in front of anyone else. We lived in parallel me in a modest apartment with peeling paint, her in a glass tower with city views. Both of us carrying unspoken truths, both of us hiding behind roles we didn't choose but couldn't step away from. And yet, all it took was a single night, a single whisper to draw the fragile lines of our worlds closer. It had been an ordinary evening, or so I thought. She had just finished another 12-hour day at the office, her sharp voice echoing in conference rooms, commanding attention, bending outcomes. By the time she walked out, her heels no longer carried confidence but exhaustion. I was waiting by the curb, engine running, as I always did. She slipped into the back seat first, like a queen returning to her carriage, but then paused. "No," she murmured, almost to herself. "Tonight, the front." She moved to the passenger seat, and for the first time, we sat side by side. The car smelled faintly of coffee and worn leather. She said nothing for several blocks, her gaze lost to the city lights. I kept my focus on the road, the rhythm of the windshield wipers marking the silence between us. And then, without warning, she spoke. "Do you ever feel," she asked softly, "like you spend all day surrounded by people, but somehow you've never been lonelier?" The question stunned me. It wasn't meant for a driver. It wasn't even meant for a subordinate. It was the kind of question someone asked into a mirror. I hesitated, unsure if I should respond, but the weight in her voice pulled something out of me. Every day, I admitted, but I've learned to live with it. She turned her head then, and for the first time I saw her not as my CEO, but as a woman. Her eyes were rimmed with something unspoken, a quiet pleading hidden behind the poise she wore like armor. That night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, her silence felt different, less like distance, more like trust. When we approached her building, the city's cold glow reflecting against its towering glass, I slowed as always. But her hand brushed lightly against my arm, startling me. "Don't stop here," she whispered, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard. "Take me all the way to your place." I froze for a moment. My breath caught. It was reckless, impossible. The rules of our worlds screamed against it. But when I looked at her, I didn't see power. I saw loneliness. I saw someone asking not for extravagance, not for luxury, but for shelter. A place to breathe. The drive from her building to my apartment was short, yet it felt endless. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was heavy with everything unsaid. I gripped the wheel tightly, rehearsing reasons to turn back, to say no, to protect the fragile line between us. But every time I stole a glance at her, she was staring forward, her jaw set, as if afraid her courage would shatter if she met my eyes. When we finally pulled into the dimly lit parking lot, she exhaled a breath that seemed to have been locked inside her for years. She looked at the worn building, the flickering hallway light barely visible through the glass doors. It was worlds away from her penthouse with its marble floors and endless views. Yet she didn't flinch. "I don't need grand," she whispered again, almost apologetically. "I just need real." In that moment, I realized the inciting event wasn't just her stepping into my car that night. It was her choosing not to step back out. For both of us, that small act, her whisper, my silence, the road between her life and mine had cracked something open. And though I didn't yet understand where it would lead, I knew one truth. Nothing about my quiet, ordinary life would remain untouched. The door to my apartment creaked when I pushed it open, as though protesting the sudden intrusion of a presence it had never expected. My place wasn't much 2 rooms, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee and detergent, and toys scattered in a corner despite my best efforts to keep them tidy. I stepped inside first, flipping the switch. The light flickered once before settling into its familiar yellow glow. She followed behind me, her heels clicking softly against the floorboards that had long lost their polish. I thought she would hesitate, maybe comment on how small it was, how modest compared to everything she was accustomed to. But she didn't. She set her bag down gently near the couch, then slipped off her shoes and tucked her feet beneath her, as though she had been here before. For the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who had run out of strength to pretend. I busied myself in the kitchen, offering her tea, though my hands trembled slightly as I filled the kettle. The quiet between us was thick, not awkward, but laden with all the questions neither of us dared to voice. Finally, she broke it. "Do you ever feel like you've built a life so carefully?" she said, her voice barely rising above the hum of the kettle. "And yet somehow you can't find yourself inside it?" Her words pierced me. I glanced at her sitting there in my small living room, her posture collapsing in ways I had never witnessed. She looked fragile, almost breakable. Yeah, I admitted slowly. Every day, it feels like I'm living for everyone else but myself. For my daughter, for my job, for survival. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it means to feel alive. The kettle whistled, but I didn't move to turn it off right away. I stood there staring at her, the truth of my confession filling the space between us. She looked at me as though she understood every word, as though my loneliness mirrored her own. When I finally set the tea before her, she wrapped her hands around the cup, but didn't drink. Her fingers trembled, and I noticed the faintest chip in her nail polish, an imperfection that seemed symbolic. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Tired of being strong, of carrying everything, of everyone expecting me to never falter. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just let it all drop." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her she wasn't alone anymore, that she could rest here even if just for one night. But another part of me screamed warnings. She was my boss, my CEO. If the world knew she was sitting here in my rundown apartment drinking tea on a couch that sagged in the middle, it would destroy her image. It could ruin me too. The war inside me grew louder with every passing second. Logic reminded me of boundaries, of lines that couldn't be crossed. But emotion, the raw human ache of seeing someone so powerful, unravel in front of me, kept pulling me closer. She looked up then, her eyes glistening not with power, but with vulnerability. "Do you know why I asked you to bring me here?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Because you didn't want to be alone tonight." She nodded, a tear slipping free, quickly brushed away. "And because you don't look at me the way everyone else does. You don't want something from me. You don't fear me. You just see me." The words struck deep. I had always kept my distance, convinced that people like her existed in a different world entirely. And yet here she was, confessing the very thing I had quietly carried for years, the longing to be seen beyond the surface. The silence stretched, heavier now, almost unbearable. My heart pounded, each beat echoing against the walls of the small apartment. I wanted to reach for her hand, to bridge the gap between us, but fear kept me rooted. If I touched her, everything would change. If I didn't, maybe I'd lose this moment forever. The choice lingered in the air, thick with possibility. Between reason and desire, duty and longing, I stood at the edge of a line I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. The night felt like it was holding its breath. She sat across from me on the couch, the steam from her untouched tea curling upward, dissolving into the dim light. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes in the walls. Every small sound louder than it should have been because silence had wrapped itself around us so tightly. I wanted to tell her something reassuring, something simple that would release the weight in her shoulders. But every phrase that came to mind felt either too small or too dangerous. So instead I asked the only thing I truly needed to know. "Why me?" My voice was quiet, but it broke the air like a stone dropped into still water. "Out of all the people in your world, why did you choose me tonight?" She blinked, her eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that made my chest ache. "Because I knew you wouldn't try to fix me," she whispered. "You'd just let me be." She exhaled, long and weary, her gaze drifting toward the toys in the corner of the room. "You've already given more of yourself than most people ever do. Not by wealth, not by power, but by presence. And that's what I needed tonight." Her words settled into me, raw and unpolished, the kind that left no room for denial. I felt something shift inside, like a lock giving way to a key I didn't know I'd been holding all this time. For years I had lived cautiously, always calculating, always choosing the safest path because my daughter depended on me. But here, in this moment, it felt like I was standing at a crossroads I couldn't ignore. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, my hands clasped together. "You should know, letting you stay here, being with you like this, it changes things. For me, for us. And I don't know if I can go back to being just your driver after tonight." Her lips parted as though to respond, but no words came at first. Then slowly, she set her teacup down, her fingers brushing against mine for the briefest second, a touch so light it felt more like a question than a gesture. "Maybe I don't want to go back," she said softly. That was it. The pivot. The moment I stopped pretending I could live untouched by her presence. I reached out, taking her hand this time, not by accident, not fleeting. Her fingers tightened around mine, and something inside me quieted. For once, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow, about consequences, about how the world would see us. I was thinking only of her hand in mine, warm and trembling, and how right it felt. "I can't promise I have much to offer," I admitted, my voice almost breaking. "But I can promise that whatever I give, it will be real." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled. Not the practiced curve of lips she wore in boardrooms, but a fragile, genuine smile that seemed to undo years of walls. The decision wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like two people finally choosing not to look away from what was already there. That night, everything changed. Not with fireworks, but with a whisper, a touch, and the quiet courage of deciding to step into something neither of us had planned, but both of us needed. The morning after felt different, though nothing in my apartment had changed. The walls still bore the faint stains of time, the curtains still sagged a little, and the coffee maker sputtered the same way it always did. Yet there was a stillness, a tenderness woven into the air, as though the night had left an imprint that the dawn could not erase. She sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee between her hands. Her hair was unpinned, falling loosely over her shoulders, and for the first time she looked ordinary. Not in a way that diminished her, but in a way that made her feel reachable, real. She wasn't the woman who stood at the top of skyscrapers making decisions worth millions. She was simply a woman trying to remember what it felt like to breathe without armor. I watched her from the doorway, part of me still struggling to accept that she was here at all. For years, our lives had been carved into separate lanes, hers paved with luxury and mine marked by survival. And yet, somehow those lanes had crossed, if only for a night. But as comforting as it felt, reality pressed its weight against me. There would be questions if anyone knew. A CEO in the home of her driver? The imbalance of power? The assumptions people would make? The whispers that could tear down reputations? I thought of my daughter, too. What would this mean for her if things spiraled? She deserved stability, not the chaos of a secret I couldn't explain. She seemed to sense the storm in me. "You're thinking too loudly," she said softly, her lips curving faintly at the corners. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I'm just trying to understand what happens next." She traced her finger around the rim of the mug, her eyes downcast. "Maybe nothing happens. Maybe this was just one night we both needed." Her voice wavered, betraying the steadiness she tried to project. "But maybe it doesn't have to end there." The choice lingered between us, fragile and undefined. I wanted to reach for certainty, but all I could grasp was the present, the sound of her voice in my kitchen, the way sunlight caught in her hair, the faint smile that softened the edges of who she usually was. Later, after she left, the apartment felt emptier than before. I picked up the coffee cup she had used, rinsing it slowly as though the water could wash away the ache of her absence. My daughter came home from school and filled the space with laughter, her voice reminding me why I couldn't afford recklessness. Yet even as I listened to her chatter about classmates and teachers, my mind drifted back to the image of a woman sitting barefoot at my kitchen table. That night, I folded laundry in silence, the hum of the machine steady beside me. I realized transformation doesn't always arrive with dramatic fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the way you notice the absence of someone's presence, in the way your chest tightens when you think of what could be. I had always thought survival meant holding myself apart, never letting anyone too close. But now survival felt incomplete without connection. She had cracked something open in me, something I wasn't sure I could close again. And though I didn't know if she would come back, the truth was undeniable. She had changed the shape of my loneliness. And in that quiet shift, I felt myself becoming someone new. Days passed, but the memory of that night lingered like a soft echo in every corner of my apartment. I caught myself glancing at the empty chair at the kitchen table, half expecting to see her there again. Her fingers curled around a coffee cup. The toys in the corner still belonged to my daughter, yet somehow they also reminded me of the way her eyes had softened when she saw them, as if she recognized a part of life she had long forgotten. We returned to our roles in the daylight. I stood by the car, opened doors, drove her through the city as though nothing had shifted. But in the small moments when our eyes met in the rearview mirror, when her hand lingered a little too long on the door handle before she stepped out, I felt the silence between us charged with unspoken truths. One evening, as I waited outside her building, I thought about her words that night. "I just need real." Maybe that was what we both had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not power, not promises we couldn't keep. Just something real enough to quiet the ache of loneliness. I don't know where this path will lead. Perhaps it will fade like a secret memory, or perhaps it will grow into something neither of us can yet name. But I know this. In the soft whisper of her voice, in the fragile strength of her presence in my small apartment, something in me awakened. And sometimes it's not the grand gestures that change a life, but a quiet request made in the rain. "Don't stop here. Take me all the way to your place." Have you ever found yourself in a moment that felt small to the world, but life-changing to you? like standing in silence with someone who finally saw through the walls you'd built? Stories like this aren't just about CEOs or drivers. They're about the fragile, hidden places inside all of us that long to be touched, to be understood. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Maybe you've had a night when everything shifted with just a whisper. I'd love to hear about it. And if you see yourself in these quiet struggles and fleeting connections, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the stories we carry are the ones that remind others they're not alone.